39 is a novel by Joyce Cary. It is the story of a young Nigerian who falls afoul of the British colonial authorities. Although the novel has a comic tone, the story itself is tragic. Joyce Cary has been quoted as saying that Mr. Johnson was his favorite book that he had written. Mr. Johnson is often read in schools and has had a wide audience. It has been adapted as a play by Norman Rawson and a 1990 film by Bruce Beresford. Chinua Achebe has said that Mr. Johnson struck him as superficial and helped form his determination to write his own novels about Nigeria. Other critics have found Cary's portrayal of his main character patronizing and Johnson himself childish. Arthur Joyce Lunel Cary, the 7th of December 1888, the 29th of March 1957, was an Anglo-Irish novelist and colonial official. Summary. Johnson, a young African, is assigned as clerk at a British district office in Fada, Nigeria. He is from a different district and is regarded as a foreigner by those native to the area. Johnson works his way into local society, marrying their only one wife. He is monogamous but never really fitting in. At the same time, he has difficulties in adjusting to the regulations and mechanism of the district office and his official duties. The district officer, Rudbeck, meanwhile, is dissatisfied with his work in the service and his life in Africa. Rudbeck conceives the notion that a road linking Fada to the main highway and larger population centers will be of great benefit to the region. Johnson, as Rudbeck's clerk, also becomes enthused about this project. Johnson is one of Cary's joy-filled characters, possessor of a great energy that infects all around him. People are drawn to Johnson and follow him without realizing that they are being led. Indeed, Johnson has no clear idea of where he is going. His delight is in seeing those around him happy. His mood infects Rudbeck, and, when Johnson suggests how the books may be fiddled to support Rudbeck's road project, the colonial officer is seduced. But Rudbeck's swindle is uncovered and he returns to England to be with his wife. Johnson now goes to work for Gollop, a retired army sergeant who has married a Nigerian woman and runs the local store. Gollop is an abusive drunkard given to racist epithets, but he admires Johnson's good-humored courage in facing up to his words and blows. Johnson, in turn, enjoys the compliment to his courage and, when Gollop next attacks him, retaliates. Gollop does not take this kind of violence seriously and thinks no less of Johnson, but he cannot have an employee who has struck him in public. Johnson is let go and leaves Fada. Meanwhile, a shortage of political officers means that Rudbeck must return. He immediately recommences his road building. Rudbeck and his superior work out the extent to which he can finagle road building funds from the accounts, but the older man warns Rudbeck that another scandal will destroy his career. The road building brings Johnson back to Fada. Rudbeck hires him again and Johnson's infectious enthusiasm makes the road building successful. But Rudbeck discovers that Johnson has been engaged in petty graft and dismisses him. Johnson turns to theft from the store to support his lifestyle and, when Gollop discovers him, kills the storekeeper. Now Rudbeck must try Johnson for murder. The trial brings Rudbeck to the breaking point. Johnson is found guilty and begs Rudbeck to keep him from the gallows by killing him. Rudbeck follows his heart rather than the rules and does so, though the act will destroy his career and possibly have other ramifications, legal and personal, that lie beyond the close of the novel. According to https://www.csmonitor.com/1991/0424/24143.html:. The title character of Mr. Johnson is a black African clerk, working for the British during the heyday of their colonial rule in the 1920s. He's never been to England, yet he thinks of himself as a proud English citizen, and practically worships the stodgy British imperialists who lord it over his country. It's an absurd situation, as absurd as the colonial system itself, and it can't help leading to tragedy for all concerned. The sad, ironic, sometimes wryly amusing events leading up to this tragedy are the subject of the movie. Whenever a film deals with the relationship between whites and people of color, especially in parts of the Third World where poverty and inequality are harsh everyday problems, it's tempting to examine the movie with microscopic care, looking for signs of racism or condescension. Mr. Johnson would not completely pass an examination like this, since its sympathies lie not only with the oppressed blacks but with the whites who oppress them. Although the English seem to have all the power, the film suggests that in subtle ways they're as trapped by colonialism as the natives they control, and they have the disadvantage of living thousands of miles from home, trying to impose their way of life on people who neither want it nor need it. Still, in the movie as in real life, the conquered Africans eventually emerge as the most hapless victims of the story, especially Mr. Johnson himself, whose fate sums up the arrogance of imperialism. Mr. Johnson is based on the last of several West African novels written by British author Joyce Cary, who's best known to moviegoers as the author of The Horse's Mouth. Made into a fine Alec Guinness comedy some 33 years ago. Cary lived and worked in the region for years, and his book has a sense of gritty authenticity and freewheeling charm that screenwriter William Boyd and the other filmmakers have translated reasonably well into movie terms. Smart acting by a fine cast also helps the proceedings. Pierce Brosnan is doggedly believable as a colonial officer who's convinced that a road he's building will magically civilize the patch of West Africa for which he's responsible. Edward Woodward is frighteningly good as an ignorant merchant who becomes Mr. Johnson's benefactor and foe. The triumph of the movie, though, is Nigerian actor Maynard Ezeashi playing Mr. Johnson himself, in as witty and persuasive a performance as I've seen this year. Mr. Johnson is the first American production to be filmed entirely in Nigeria. The picture was shot by Australian director Bruce Beresford, whose past works range from atrocities like King David and Barry Mackenzie Holds His Own to memorable successes like Breaker, Morant and Tender Mercies, as well as Driving Miss Daisy, a popular Academy Award winner last year. Since this makes 2 Beresford movies in a row with black characters in the spotlight, I asked him recently if he has developed a special interest in the problems and challenges of black leafy. He said no, that he's just interested in good stories, whomever their characters may happen to be. Although some filmmakers do explore favorite themes in movie after movie, I tend to believe Mr. Beresford when he says he chooses his projects one at a time. Mr. Johnson and Driving Miss Daisy are likable and well-made pictures, but they aren't full of deep thoughts or insights. They're just good stories. Still, good stories with sympathetic black characters aren't exactly plentiful in today's movie world, and stories that criticize imperial attitudes toward the Third World are encountered even less often, despite the fact that such attitudes linger today in devious ways, leading many people in the developed world to tend to think of underdeveloped countries as somehow less than real and important. For these reasons, as well as the simple movie-going pleasures it offers, Mr. Johnson is a welcome fort.